Broadcasting from occupied territories or the flea media, it's the Reality Dysfunction Podcast, a space where a diverse group of brown folk from across the nation explore the political experiences and social future of our Chicano Latino community. Control the narrative, resist the dysfunction.
Hey, Carlos, I want to thank you for joining me today. Very excited about your book, your most recent book of poetry, Human Cicada. As we were talking about earlier, your book, Coyote Sun, was one of the very first poetry books that I ever owned. Yep, that's it right there. I had it for years. I don't know what happened to it. And I say that
it's an old one, man, 1990.
Yeah, I had that book for a long time. I don't usually lose books. And so I must have loaned it to somebody and they didn't give it back or something happened. But
don't worry, there'll be another one in the mail for you. Don't worry, right. I've got an extra one.
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay.
But Human Cicada. So this book just came out this past year.
Last month.
Yeah, just last month, right. But came out in 2022. Mm-hmm. Prickly Pear Publishing and Nopali Press out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. This is a pretty big book of poems.
It's substantial.
It is, I think, very substantial, and also struck me as reflective. As I was reading the poems, I was definitely getting the feeling you've been thinking about your life a lot. I just thought maybe we would start there. I have a couple of poems in particular I'd like to talk to you about, but maybe if you could just kind of give us an overview. I very much enjoyed this book of poetry. I want to let you know that.
I appreciate that. I'm glad you did enjoy it. Having everybody having our COVID crisis globally and nationally and locally, a lot of us just had to sit our butts down and do something in the house, whether it was paint the house, put a new floor in, fix the windows, whatever the hell it was, we had to do it. And one of the things that was definitely on my to-do list was to work it out so that I could have a book after coming out with my chap book back in 2010, which was called 14 Abriles Poems. This little chap book was the last thing I did, and that was, like I said, in 2010. Afterwards, in the commentary that I did in the back of that book, I mentioned that my life has been, like, in terms of publishing, like that of a cicada. And when I was thinking of a title, I said, maybe I'm a human cicada, like on one level. Like I have to go through these long periods of gestation and dormancy and then emerge again to have something to say, to make my sound, right? That I've just answered the question, why human cicada?
That's very interesting, because I will tell you that I had many questions about the title of the book. Mm-hmm. But I like the rationale, particularly the gestational. That makes sense. I mean, in living now in a place where cicadas come every summer, but every summer there's cicadas.
Wow.
But there are certain summers where it's just out of control here in Prescott, Arizona. I mean, where like the sound it's deafening. And then growing up in the Midwest, like I did, so you and I are both pretty much Midwest.
We spent a good time suffering in the Midwest.
Yeah. You mentioned that you were from Chicago. And so now I know that you know that there are millions of Mexicanos that live in Chicago and have lived there for well over a century. But right. I mean, maybe if you could talk a little bit about that community, I think that would be really good. There are a lot of people who listen to this podcast, I think, who are not as familiar with the history and the legacy of Chicanos and Mexicanos in the Midwest.
So we have 100 years in Chicago, but there was a lull because the 30s, and then in the 40s things picked up again, and a lot of people started moving here. My relatives, I'll just make a long story short, my relatives did not come up here until after Second World War, probably late 50s, towards the late 50s. Some of them came up here. And then my own arrival, I did not reach Chicago with my family. My parents came up here when I was 14, and that was 1967. So, okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I spent 14 years in Texas.
My family's from there too. My dad's side of the family. They're from the Rio Grande Valley, Westlaco.
Oh, Westlaco. Okay,
Yep.
sure.
So let's talk a little bit about the book. I mean, maybe we could start. Do you have a poem that you would like to read?
Absolutely.
Start us off with?
Sure do. I'm going to read a poem that gives honor to one artist in particular from San Antonio by the name of Cesar A. Martinez, who I have to tell you, if you have never looked at his art, I hope the listeners, the people tuning in, go look up his name, Cesar A. Martinez. Go look for his art, and you will see someone who I guess he's, they talk about Ed Paschke in Chicago. That's kind of a big name, right? And but I think Cesar is his match, and should have as much international and national recognition. So this section that his poem appears in the book is a thing called Almost Invisible Talents. And almost invisible talents, that's how we live in this country. Oftentimes they don't know about us. There's lots of us, but they don't know about us. So this humble householder, modern Tejano Toltec, welcomes us to his armadillo corrugated casa. While he opens his guarded black clippings binder, it reveals a parade of rostros de los Chicanos muertos and others posed in their favorite or final public photos. We ponder the once alive, many ceased orbits and notice how heat has oxidized white print to brown. He draws and paints as deliberate as science allows, forms prisms from the heart crystal. Out of each human face, resurrection springs in new colors. Inside the artist's mind studio, a magician's mortuary, without mourner's tears or egocentric memories, decades gone, grins, sunglasses, squints, sampaku, stares, live again. Afloat on a tapestry of luxuriant magentas, greens and umbers. Cesar's magic, a peyote kaleidoscope, snap open, a tower of fireworks, sizzle in a torrent of canvas strokes, while listening to the silver chords, the Españas flamenco, which accompanies him as he strikes and strums with one magnetic brush, flashing side to side, open, closed, como el torador, dance free to the bull of blindness with shafts of light.
On the King's Road in San Antonio, Texas.
Right.
Yeah.
Right there on the old original El Camino del Rey, right there, right to San Antonio. I love San Antonio for its capacity to demonstrate our roots in this nation, this young nation.
One of the things that I noticed in terms of like reading through this particular collection is that you make a lot of references to Toltecs, which I think is cool. It's a little different in the sense that a lot of the stuff that people have put out, especially I'd say in the last 20 years or so is very Mexica centric, which you definitely are touching on in this collection. But Toltecs are prominent, right? Or the imagery of the Toltec is prominent. I was just wondering if
I'm glad you mentioned that because if let me explain the reason why I use the word Toltec, and I use it a number of times as you pointed out, as you mentioned. The reason why the word Toltec is utilized is because they were considered by the Mexica when they reached Tenochtitlan in Anahuac, and they were there. They knew that there were other people before them, And the people before them were considered master artists, right? Master artists and builders. And I see so I've kind of decided anyone that I encounter with indigenous ancestry, whether they're, of any tribe, any nation, but especially if you share the general Mexican diaspora heritage, I'm going to say you have sangre tolteca as a compliment. That's just meaning, you're a master, or you're someone who is in charge of your craft, and you have lived by it and mastered it, and you're doing that. So there are plenty of people in that. It's just to me, it's a status level, rather than saying, just using the kind of the Anglo-Sajon term, like a distinguished or an august artist or something, but we say a Toltec artist, artista Tolteca.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was kind of my turn.
No, that's cool. That makes sense. Like in the poems that I've read, but I mean, you're really all across all of North America, from Mesoamerica all the way up into Canada, right? Making very solid connections with the Three Fires people in the Great Lakes area, the Anishinaabe, and then using those references and also mixing that with Chicano and then Mexica, Lakota. I mean, there's a really firm base of indigeneity in the poems that you wrote, particularly for this particular publication. But I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about that and why you think that that's important.
Here's the thing, Ernesto. There is such a thing as collective amnesia, and there is such a thing as denial, and there is such a thing as being deliberately kept in the dark about who we are and why we're here. Also, there is some shame in the name Indio when someone would call us that. And again, like the Mexicas say in Mexico, they say, "Nosotros no somos indios. Los indios pertenecen a la India." Like they belong. We're not Indians. The Indians are over in India, but we are indigenous, and we do have indigenous names. And so, what that means, not all of us, of course, not everybody that's a Mexican, because there's all kinds of Mexicans are indigenous. There are plenty of European and Chinese and African and all kinds of Mexicans that are not necessarily indigenous, but again, we know that the majority of the people are. And in the case of that, what's interesting is that N. Scott Momaday, which will ring a bell for a number of people, won the Pulitzer Prize for the book called The Housemate of Dawn back in the 60s. This man admitted in public, I didn't know, he was just giving a speech here in Chicago, and he said that he was part Mexican. And he belongs to an Oklahoma tribe. I believe that is Comanche. I'm going to have to double check that. But here he is, N. Scott Momaday, and he says, "I'm part Mexican." And he goes, and people wonder, how is that? And he goes, "I know, before you wonder how that's possible, we used to raid Mexico and take the women and bring them up, and they became part of our people." So, whenever you look at any tribe, here's the thing, Ernesto. Whenever you look at any tribe that talks about the importance of the three sisters, maíz, right? Calabaza, right? Frijol, beans, squash, corn. Where do you think the corn came from? Historically, we know, anthropologically or whatever, the studies of plants, botanists will say corn was perfected and created in Mexico.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, if you look at the history and until, I'm going to say, this is why we study. Most of the evidence that I am aware of says corn is a Mexican offering to the human beings, to us, to the Nicantlaca, to the human beings, to the the people, right? So here we are. I would just say, if you have corn up in New York State, with the Hondo Asani, and they're talking about the three sisters. Hey, we must have had some trade going on, and of course we did. And there was a place called what? Cahokia. So that was some time back, but there were other places. I'm sure plenty of trade happened. So I'm going to read a poem, if you don't mind, about Cuauhtemoc. Mexicans had a bad time with Moctezuma. He was too bowled over by Cortez and his gang, and they settled that by braining him with a rock when he was out on the porch talking to the people, saying, "You should listen to Hernan over here, my new friend." And people hit him in the head with a rock and took him out. And then Cuauhtemoc was next in line. We had seen this name Cuauhtemoc, and some people were calling it falling eagle. I've looked at the pictures and I said, I don't see a falling eagle when you see the rendering. I see a swooping eagle. He's swooping in, not falling. Well, swooping means you're more like in command of your gestures and motions, and more of a deliberate thing rather than just tumbling or falling.
Well, when a bird swoops, it's in a predatory motion. I mean, birds swoop on prey. That's where that term comes from. So yeah, I have also seen things that talk about how the name has been mistranslated, perhaps purposely mistranslated, to add yet one more level of despair and defeat to the idea. Yeah,
it's like, listen, every conqueror has to wage psychological warfare on his object. So calling him a fallen eagle versus a swooping eagle, subtle, but it works. Calling this guy a warrior chief instead of a general, kind of works. Anyway, the poem is called Aguántalo, Endure It. It's on page 89, if you're following. Cuauhtemoc, swooping eagle, the last leader fell fighting centuries ago. It earned him artistic immortality on Mexican currency and public statuary for a society that enshrines its native royalty while ignoring those who currently share his features and non-Spanish language. Depicted as a muscular man, chiseled profile, framed inside an eagle-beaked helmet, Cuauhtemoc, with outstretched arm and hand, points away from his ancestral land, where gods first spoke with the Mexica, Anahuac, Tenochtitlan, Coyoacán, Iztapalapa, Tabasco, Texcoco, all of it Cuauhtemoc's last domain. His before the bearded strangers came. In floating mountains with giant dogs owned by pale riders who wore iron chests to deflect the rain of resistance obsidian. The strangers burnt their boats, houses, los barcos, upon landing, closing off escape until new boats could be built were to carry off all forms of Mexica wealth. Cuauhtemoc was captured and dragged along with his captain to the Spaniards' interrogation cave, where a large clay pot blazed with mesquite heated flame, tied down, bare souls, blackened and slowly peeled, seared off, unless they would confess, where the rooms of the sun's golden excrement glowed. Cuauhtemoc's loyal captain howled in pain. In pain, this unbearable, to which Cuauhtemoc replied, Aguántalo, you'll endure it. Perhaps you think I'm being bathed in warm, flower-scented water. Cuauhtemoc, in agony, unable to walk, was hung before sunrise, buried in the blue jungle, only to reappear centuries later on treasury bills and public monuments, pointing to his still living people in the navel of the moon, Mexico.
Yeah, I was looking at this one. I think that I mean, for myself personally, this whole idea about who Cuauhtemoc was, I mean, is very fascinating, right? And I really enjoy this second verse. It says, "In public statuary for a society that enshrines its native royalty while ignoring those who currently share his features in non-Spanish language." I mean, the when I read that, it immediately took me anyways, back to the whole La Raza Cósmica, and the way that I think that it's very clear that that text has been misinterpreted by a lot of people, maybe even like by a whole generation of people, to really see that as that Vasconcelos is talking about the coming together of these three different races, and he is, or these two different races that create a third race. But I mean, it's really couched in this sort of racism that we see right here. I mean, Vasconcelos is basically saying, thank God these guys came, because we'd be butt naked savages, worshiping pagan gods if they hadn't come here and conquered us and made us better people by their blood.
Ernesto, in Mexico, from what I understand, is that someone is not recognized as actually an indigenous person by the government unless they live and speak y hablan y que usan with some frequency their language with their own people, their own tribe. So if you don't live in the Otomi area and speak the Otomi language or the Huasteco or the Purepacha, if you're not speaking that, they're not going to call you indigenous. If they were to apply that in the United States with all the people enrolled with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and say, if you do not have a command of your language, you're not an Indian. Doesn't matter what you look like. Doesn't matter if you have, bald or you have hair or you have whatever, a beard. If you don't speak the language and the people, and you don't live near the people, you're not an Indian. You're not indigenous, I should say. So, that could, how would that fly in the US of A? How many Indians would there be? I'm just saying. But in Mexico, there are millions of indigenous speakers.
Yeah.
Millions.
Yes.
The sad thing, this is the main point I think I want to leave you with, is that our brothers and sisters in the US of A who are indigenous need to understand that Mexicans are actually the largest indigenous group in North America, because Mexico being part of North America, the Mexicans are the largest indigenous group. And so it kind of hurts us that when we go to the powwows and stuff, they don't want to see our flag. They got the Canadian flag and they got the US flag up there, but they don't put the Mexican flag up there. And the Mexican flag actually is based on indigenous symbols.
Yeah.
So there it is.
No, I really enjoyed that poem.
Okay.
I thought it was good. Now I want to ask you about one. This one this was one of my favorites. Canto of Heaven, Talocan or Hell, Mictlan, on page 41. I mean, I know that you weren't maybe not prepared to read that one, but if you wanted to read this and maybe we could have a conversation about it real quick. We're gonna have to, wrap up here.
Okay.
But I'd really like to get one more poem in if we could.
This is the one you want?
I like this poem. It's either that or He Didn't Stop Singing.
We're gonna do this one.
Okay.
Canto of Heaven, Tlalocan or Hell, Mictlan. For Ricardo Sanchez, born 3/29/1941, passed on to the cosmos 9/3/1993. Ricardo Sanchez, for me, by the way, was one of the, probably for the longest time, and has been and always will be, at least in my old mind, the master poet, code switching poet of the Chicano people. Plus, he's kind of Shakespearean. He made up his own poetic terms, like as Shakespeare did. And this is a brother who spent time in prison and did finally earn a PhD. Okay. He said the PhD represented poet highly developed, or pinto highly developed, or that's what it stood for in his joke. For Ricardo Sanchez. Can Chicanos lay claim to our own Homer, Milton, or Baudelaire? Pues guáchale, what are we to think cuando Ricardo Sanchez, el poet highly developed, our PhD in more than barriology, linked to those immortals by master scholar Felipe de Ortega y Gasca, in the forward of his pioneering Canto y Grito mi Liberación. I first read Sanchez's work during the Anchor 70s as he explored in masterful code switching Spanish and English the American devil's bargain of his life. After Soledad prison pains, was he really like the cover's painting of the young, sunburnt, mustache, chuco, and cool hat, unflinching stare of sly guy, reefer cooked eyes, and totally fed up with bogus borders? Con tattoos hidden under a ruddy camisa, turned up collar, he was fully aware of his turbulent years were not over, especially when he declared, "We shall create our own Chicano society. Y si no le gusta el gringo," or will the future disinter our bones and sing praises to our Chicanosaurian poetics in some distant mausoleum of diversity? Whatever our destiny, it will be something that we have created through the pain of daring to be ourselves at whatever cost. I first met him in San Antonio at Floricanto. Later, we all joined others of los Southwest, Midwest cultural activists to create Cantos al Pueblo con los Indio Chicano artistas in murals, music, and poetic narratives in Milwaukee, Corpus Christi, St. Paul, Phoenix, Carbondale, and lastly, Chicago. I lament millions of people have not heard his cantos or liberating llantos, nor have ever read a word of Ricardo's hefty hechizo spells, nor his slim Milwas blues and gritos norteños. Fortunately, we still have many of his fine libros ready to be mined of their potent poetic ore, for he offered us his rage and love, real human treasure, maybe, and that's all a poet can do before they go towards Tlalocan or Mictlan forever. Eso, punto.
See, and to me, I mean, this poem, and then the poem that is also, it was about Chuy Negrete, the homage. He didn't
those
stop
are
singing.
my homage or eulogiac pieces, right? I mean,
but they're also, and this goes back to the beginning of the conversation as I was reading through this. I mean, as I get older, and then you start thinking about people that you've known and that you grew up with, maybe in a way, right? I mean, there's growing up when you're a child, and then there's growing up through your 20s and 30s. I mean, it's that self-reflection, I think, that really struck me the most as I was reading through these, because even an homage, in my opinion, is a work of self-reflection, right? Yep. As we think about the people who have impacted us and what they mean to us. And I did not know Ricardo Sanchez, but I have read his poetry, and I think that this opening part, can Chicanos lay claim to our own Homer, Milton, or Baudelaire? Wow.
You know, Ernesto, as a professor, I will say this to you, mi compa. I will tell you this, that the genius of our people have been underestimated time and again. That the creativity of our people have been discounted, right? So all we have to do is read Rodolfo Jorge Gonzalez's I Am Joaquin, to see where we've been and how we've been and maybe where we're going. It merits reading. And I'm just saying, so, anyone who teaches our literature should always show that off as kind of a cornerstone of our literature. I think that the corrido was the first way that we communicated poetically, through the corrido, providing a chronological and colorful narrative of our lives. But as the Chicanos, we've taken it without guitarra, without música, and put it in, of course, the rhythm and meter and cadence of voice and language, and so that we could have people like Ricardo Sanchez and Abelardo Lalo Delgado, or people like, who could declamar. They could come out and they could captivate 100, 200 people outdoors. People would come and hear them. These guys were, to borrow the term, they were orators of that would, I'm sure they would have been respected orators in the ancient world of Aslan, or in Europe, or wherever, because of their skill. But again, our people don't know each other. See, you go into Mexican homes and you don't see our literature there. Very rarely do you see our own literature in our own people's homes. What you see is, the oppressor's literature. We don't support our own literature.
Yeah.
What surprises me is how many gringos read our literature. Hello, thank you very much. I appreciate it. But it's almost, I made this argument 20 years ago in an essay that I had published in Los Angeles in a magazine called Rattle, that the small press, if we didn't have Euro-American allied readers of our literature, I don't think our literature would survive.
But I mean, and just don't you think, though, in some ways that's really a condition of our colonization, that sort of devaluing of everything colonized, everything brown, that we're taught right from the very beginning, that, we're not as smart. We're not as good. I find it as, I try to have political conversations with people, that they're very fluent in Republican and Democrat, but that if you try to talk to them about what that means in terms of Chicano politics, the conversation comes to an abrupt end. And it's not because they don't want to talk about it. The words simply don't exist for them to be able to engage meaningfully. I mean, do you think it's something that has something to do with that?
Well, the model, see, people can talk about what they've seen modeled and what they've seen. Theoretically, they can talk all day long, but when they want to get serious and empirical and practical, they want to see a model that's worked. And even just to know our own, there are a few models to operate off of. That's part of the issue. And there's been plenty of attempts, but most of them have been sabotaged by the powers that be, and sometimes by our own stupidity. It behooves anyone who assumes a leadership role, any woman, any man that wants to do this, they have to be of good heart, of clean heart, and sober to lead. It's going to be hard. Too many people are, and if it's not your own people trying to mess you up, it's going to be the powers that be that try to plant something on you.
Yeah, like a sack.
Like they do.
Hey, Carlos, where does all of the Chicana, Chicano, Chicanexes who are listening to us talk right now, where do they get this book?
They can go right to here. Yeah, they can go right to Prickly. Where is that little symbol? Can you see that?
Sure can. Prickly Pear Publishing.
Yeah,
okay.
You can go right there and order it from them. if you tell them, use the term podcast, and they'll get a discount on the price. It's $18, and they can pick it up for $16.
Okay.
So they get a couple of bucks off, which is, depending where you are. And of course the shipping, again, you all know that they're playing games with the post office is playing games like crazy with what to do and where to go and how to get stuff sent out. If you don't go right to a Xicana owned and operated press, which is Prickly Pear Publishing, if you don't go there and you just want to go to Amazon, you'll still get the book, but you'll be working with whoever Amazon is, right? So, yeah. But Amazon has it. It's there. You could also maybe ask a bookstore to pick it up. If you want to support a bookstore, you ask them to get it. They'll get it in for you, and just they'll order it. And it has an ISBN. The name is just not the Human Cicada, but Human Cicada.
Human Cicada. That's right.
Cumpian.
All right. That's all the time we have for today. I want to thank Brother Carlos Cumpian for talking with me. It has been my pleasure over the past pandemic years to work with him on a project called Mexicanos 2070. And it's been very exciting. I was really looking forward to this book, and I hope that you all take a minute, order a copy, and enjoy it the way that I did. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
This is the Reality Dysfunction.